Philippines, 1945. Rain hammered the corrugated tin roofs like distant gunfire. The jungle steamed, thick with rot and humidity. Under the open bamboo shelter, 23 Japanese women sat in silence, mud on their knees, fear in their eyes. A whistle shrieked. An American MP barked, "Keep your head down." Boots stomped through puddles as the women flinched, their shoulders trembling in rhythm with the rain. The camp smelled of diesel, sweat, and boiled rice. Every sound carried weight metal clanging, someone coughing, the slow scrape of a guard's rifle, butt dragging through wet soil. The women didn't know why they'd been gathered this morning. Some still wore fragments of their old nurse uniforms. Others clutched torn blankets. They had surrendered weeks ago near Luzon, pulled from makeshift hospitals after the front collapsed. There were rumors this camp wasn't like the others. It was run by Americans who followed procedure, who talked about the Geneva rules. But procedure had many faces. The officers' words, translated through interpreters, sounded polite until they weren't. One order, then another, then silence. Rain dripped through the roof, soaking into the women's hair. No one dared raise her head. The command had been clear, eyes down, hands on knees. Yet beneath the mud and obedience, a pulse of defiance flickered. The young prisoner in the second row, Tanaka, felt it rising. She had once taught school in Kyoto before the war. Her instincts told her, when someone forces you to look away, that's when they fear your gaze the most. A guard shifted his stance, the rifle strap squealing under strain. His jaw was tight. Maybe 24, maybe less. He wasn't shouting now, just watching, the kind of stare that makes a person smaller, even in silence. The rain grew heavier, masking every breath. For a brief second, Tanaka wondered if the world outside the wire even existed. Her mind replayed her mother's voice, "Keep your head high." The irony cut deep. Then, without meaning to, Tanaka's chin rose an inch. Just one. Her eyes caught a sliver of light off the soldier's belt buckle, a tiny rebellion against the command that defined their days. The guard froze. The next moment stretched thin as wire, and that single glance would ignite whispers across the camp, starting what no one could stop. For half a second, time stopped. Tanaka's eyes locked with the young Americans, and the world seemed to forget the rain. Around them, bamboo creaked, mud bubbled, and every prisoner froze mid-breath. That one forbidden glance felt louder than a gunshot. His face, hard, freckled, jaw trembling, betrayed something no one expected. Uncertainty, not rage, not cruelty. Just confusion, as if even he didn't believe his own orders anymore. Then came the sound, crack. A bamboo rod slammed into the mud inches from Tanaka's knee. The guard beside him had struck down, missing her by intent or accident. No one could tell. The water splashed onto her cheek, a cold slap that told her the moment was over. Eyes down, someone shouted again, voice hoarse. Boots shuffled, rifles clanked, but no one moved for a long few seconds. The air thickened, electric. Later that night, whispers spread through the camp like sparks. The one who looked up. That was how the rumor began. Women repeated it softly while ration lines formed, while bandages were changed, while letters were written and burned before the guards could see. That look became legend, dangerous, forbidden, but alive. In American reports, discipline problems had surged during the last Pacific months, 3 times higher than in early campaigns. Fatigue, heat, disease, and guilt tore through units faster than malaria. Soldiers like the young MP were cracking under pressure. They followed orders, but every shout carried a tremor. Some had seen friends die from ambushes, others just couldn't tell right from wrong anymore. From the enemy's side, the confusion looked different. We saw anger, but also fear in his face. One survivor later recalled. That fear made sense only later. when they realized how little anyone in the camp truly understood what they were doing to each other. Tanaka lay awake that night, hearing rain on canvas. She tried to imagine her son, her students, a classroom filled with voices. Instead, she saw that guard's eyes again, flickering like a candle on the edge of dying light. Somewhere outside, someone whispered her name. The legend was spreading faster than she could stop it, and by morning, everyone would know what had happened in that fleeting second of defiance. By dawn, the camp hummed with whispers. The storm hadn't stopped all night. Sheets of rain turned the yard into a mirror of brown water, but beneath the dripping roofs, a story took shape. She looked up. Someone murmured. She didn't bow. It moved from tent to tent like contraband. Even those who hadn't seen it swore they had. The phrase, "keep your head down now," carried irony, maybe even courage. Tanaka didn't speak. She pressed her wet blanket tighter around her shoulders, pretending not to hear. But the others glanced at her. Quick, fearful, reverent. A woman in the next row passed her a scrap of rice paper. On it, written with a stolen pencil stub, were just 2 words, "You remember." Tanaka hesitated, then tucked it inside her sleeve. That was how the secret diaries began. Tiny acts of resistance disguised as notes about weather and rations. The rain drummed against the bamboo walls, masking the quiet scratching of graphite on paper. 19 women alive in Block 3. One note read, "Rice reduced to half ration." Another, "No letters this week," one guard cried. The smallest details became lifelines, evidence of existence. But rumor had its own power. The guards began to notice the way the prisoners looked at each other. They couldn't prove anything, but suspicion crept into every patrol. The Americans were restless, their tempers shorter. Food was spoiling in the humidity, mail routes were failing, and discipline reports, though redacted, showed a breakdown of order across Pacific camps. From the enemy's side, the perception was clear. Even our silence was seen as defiance. One diary later read, "When the women moved slower than ordered, it was called insolence. When they obeyed too fast, it was called mockery." Every gesture was wrong. That evening, the storm worsened. Wind tore through the camp, lifting canvas flaps and extinguishing lanterns. Someone shouted. A guard's voice swallowed by thunder. In the chaos, a tent collapsed. Tanaka heard boots running, flashlights flickering. The guards were counting heads. One name didn't answer. A chill raced down Tanaka's spine. Someone was missing. The rain hammered harder, erasing footprints, erasing clues. And as lightning split the sky, Tanaka realized the rumors had become something more dangerous than talk. Someone had acted on them. The storm didn't end. It only got meaner. By midnight, the camp was a swamp. Floodlights sliced through sheets of rain, turning every drop into glass. Boots splashed through the mud as a whistle screamed across the yard. "Count again." Someone shouted. One of the Japanese women was gone. Tanaka stood with the others, drenched, trembling, eyes fixed on the ground. Guards stormed between rows, rifles slung, flashlights shaking in their hands. The floodlight glare turned the women's faces ghost, pale. The guards were young, angry, and afraid. Fear was easier to aim than a gun. A jeep engine coughed alive near the gate. Harris, the camp sergeant, climbed in, jaw clenched tight. "Search the perimeter," he ordered. His voice was calm, but his eyes flicked toward the huts, toward the prisoners, as if calculating guilt. The jeep roared into the darkness, wheels spitting mud. In the rain, Tanaka whispered, "She'll die out there." No one answered. They all knew the jungle didn't forgive mistakes. Between the lightning and the shouting, she could hear the snapping of branches, the echo of boots in water, and the faint hum of insects that never cared about war. Somewhere beyond the wire, the missing woman was alone. Her name was Ito. Before capture, she had been a field nurse. She'd survived air raids, hunger, malaria, and now this. Reports after the war would confirm that between February and June of 1945, at least 12 escape attempts were recorded in Luzon camps. Most ended the same way. Either the jungle swallowed them or the guards did. Inside the camp, silence turned suffocating. They feared our escape more than our hatred. One survivor later said, "It was true. The Americans had been told that every Japanese captive was trained to die rather than surrender. To lose one meant failure, shame, paperwork. Hours crawled. The storm finally thinned to drizzle. Floodlights dimmed. And just before dawn, the guards returned. Harris led them, uniform soaked, face unreadable, in his hand something small wrapped in mud. Streaked cloth. Tanaka's breath caught. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He was carrying a photograph. The lost nurse, Ito, limped beside him, pale but alive. And in that muddy photograph lay the secret that would unravel everything next. Dawn crawled in gray and wet. The rain had stopped, but the camp still smelled of rust and smoke. Sergeant Harris walked through the rows of kneeling prisoners, his boots sinking deep in the mud. In his left hand, wrapped in a rag, was a crumpled photograph. The woman, Ito, stood beside him, shaking, soaked alive. Her lips moved without sound until finally she whispered, "My son." The picture was of a small boy, maybe 4 years old, standing outside a wooden house in Tokyo. His smile was faint, eyes squinting into the sun. Ito tried to explain through broken English and trembling gestures that she only wanted to send the photo home. One letter, one image. Harris said nothing. Another guard snapped, "No personal mail. Rules are rules, rules." The word hung heavy in the humid air, heavier than the rifles. The women watched as Harris stared at the photograph longer than he should have. He knew what would come next: confiscation, report filing, the usual bureaucratic cruelty dressed as order. He tucked the photo into an envelope, sealed it, and walked away without a word. Tanaka watched Ito sink to her knees, hands pressed together, not in prayer, but in something closer to exhaustion. Around them, the whispers started again. Contraband, forbidden, dangerous. That picture meant more than any ration. It was proof of a world before the cages. Later, in the mess tent, the guards argued. Some said the photo should be destroyed to avoid emotional disruption. Others shrugged. "It's just paper," one muttered. Yet paper was power here. Even American censors destroyed one out of every 5 POW letters before they ever left the camps. Control didn't need bullets, it needed silence. That night, the wind returned. The camp lanterns swayed, shadows bending across the barracks. Tanaka couldn't sleep. She kept thinking of that little boy's face. Somewhere, he might be staring at the same sky, waiting for a letter that would never come. When morning broke, the guards lined the women up again. Harris was missing from formation. So was the envelope. The photo was gone. Ito's hands shook violently as she searched the ground, the straw mat, her clothing. Nothing, and this time even the Americans looked uneasy. Something had shifted, and everyone could feel it. By noon, the camp had gone still too still. The guards weren't shouting anymore. They were whispering. The missing photograph had become a problem no one wanted to own. Harris had vanished into the command tent, where the typewriter clacked and stopped, like a heartbeat deciding whether to quit. Outside, the prisoners waited under the blazing sun, heads bowed, heat shimmering off puddles that refused to dry. The bamboo interrogation tent stood apart from the barracks. 2 floodlights hung from poles, buzzing with flies. Inside, Harris faced his commanding officer, Major Denton. a man whose face looked carved from regulation itself. "It's a breach of procedure," Denton said, tapping the table. "You let sentiment cloud the chain of custody." Harris didn't answer. The photo lay between them, water, wrinkled, the boy's face still smiling through the stains. Denton wanted it logged as unauthorized material. Harris wanted it returned. Neither would happen. The Major's pen hovered, waiting to make the whole thing disappear in ink. Meanwhile, Tanaka and the others were ordered to stand in the yard. Collective punishment disguised as inspection. The sun baked through their wet clothes. A guard paced, counting them over and over, as if the repetition itself could restore order. Somewhere behind the curtain, Harris's voice rose, then fell again. The Americans were trapped in their own contradiction. Officially, the Geneva Convention of 1929 demanded humane treatment of prisoners. Unofficially, Pacific Command called that a guideline. Reports later showed that clauses 82 through 97, covering mail, possessions, and respect, were ignored or interpreted flexibly in most island camps. From the prisoners' view, it looked simpler. They quoted laws as if that made cruelty cleaner. The women endured each day not because of mercy, but because paperwork required them to survive. Every rule became a weapon, one they couldn't see, one that didn't bleed. As evening fell, Harris stepped out of the tent, his eyes hollow. He passed the women without speaking, the photo gone again, filed, hidden, erased. But his hands trembled as he adjusted his helmet strap. Tanaka caught the smallest flicker in his eyes, shame. The next morning, he appeared at roll call with the same stiff posture, but something behind it had cracked. That night, in the dim light of his quarters, he opened a diary that wasn't his. Night again. The camp murmured in uneasy sleep, while frogs croaked from the flooded ditches. Inside his narrow quarters, Sergeant Harris sat on a wooden crate, the confiscated diary open across his knees. He hadn't meant to take it, but when he'd searched the barracks that afternoon, something about its pages stopped him. Careful handwriting, thin strokes, each word deliberate. The cover was made from rice, paper stitched with thread from a prisoner's torn sleeve. He turned a page. Day 42, food thin. One of us sings softly at night, so we don't forget voices. Another line, a soldier looked away when I cried. I think that was kindness. Harris stared at the words until they blurred. He hadn't written anything in months, not even home. Somewhere in Ohio, a letter from his mother waited unopened, her last one before she passed. He'd never found time to read it. Outside, the guards played cards under a tarpaulin, their laughter forced. The war was ending soon, everyone knew. But here, in this swamp of discipline and denial, the end felt further than ever. According to Army records, more than 16% of military police in the Pacific had once been teachers, clerks, men of paperwork and rules, not soldiers. Harris had been a teacher too. Maybe that was why the diary hurt. It reminded him of students he'd told to follow directions, even when those directions broke their hearts. The candle guttered, throwing shadows across the bamboo wall. He kept reading. They say we are enemies, one entry said. But when they look at us, I see something like pity, or maybe they see themselves. The sentence hit him harder than any explosion he'd survived. From outside, the sound of boots approached the night patrol, shifting. Harris closed the diary fast, heartbeat quickening. He shouldn't have it. Possessing prisoner materials was a violation, but he couldn't put it back either. That book was the only honest voice left in a camp built on silence. He slipped it beneath his jacket, blew out the candle, and stepped into the night. The rain had returned, soft this time, washing over everything like forgiveness that came too late. At dawn, the loudspeaker crackled with a new order from command. One that would break the thin piece all over again. The morning broke with a mechanical voice cutting through mist. All prisoners assemble yard, immediate compliance. Harris stood near the gate, jaw tight, raincoat unbuttoned, the diary hidden under his uniform. The paper in his pocket carried a new command from headquarters: demonstrate discipline, break morale, ensure obedience for inspection. In military language, it sounded sterile. In reality, it meant one thing: humiliation. The bamboo yard filled with rows of women kneeling in mud. Their uniforms hung in tatters, rainwater running down their faces like sweat. Harris avoided Tanaka's eyes. He didn't need to look to feel the weight of what he was about to enforce. Behind him, Lieutenant Morse read the directive aloud, every word slow and clear. Heads down, remain until ordered. Cameras clicked somewhere in the background, documentation for the records. The guards moved down the line, shouting, "Lower, don't look up." The sound of boots squelching in mud mixed with thunder rumbling over the hills. The command wanted to test control, to make these women bow not just their heads, but their humanity. Harris clenched his fists. Orders like this weren't new. Reports later would list 37 psychological control. Drills conducted across Pacific camps during March of 1945, each one designed to remind captives who held power. But something about this morning felt different. Maybe it was the silence. No one cried, no one begged. Just the sound of rain and the heavy breathing of men pretending they weren't ashamed. Harris walked past Tanaka's row. Her head was bowed, but her hands didn't tremble. For a second, he thought she might speak. She didn't. Instead, from somewhere near the back, a soft voice rose, barely a whisper. It was Ito. "They wanted to teach us shame," she said in Japanese. The guard beside her barked for silence, but she didn't stop. Harris looked up toward the ridge where the officers stood, clipboards in hand. The demonstration had worked, on paper at least. But inside the camp, something unseen was shifting again. Rain started falling harder, blurring faces into one gray sea of defiance and fatigue. And then, amid the sound of water and orders, another voice, quiet but firm, cut through everything. It said just one word: no. And that was the moment everything began to fracture. The word "no" hung in the air like thunder refusing to fade. Every sound in the camp froze: the rain, the boots, even the wind through the palm trees. Harris's pulse slammed against his throat. He turned slowly. It was Tanaka. Her head was no longer bowed. She looked straight at him, rain streaming down her face, eyes sharp as glass. For a moment no one moved. The guards hesitated, unsure if they'd actually heard defiance or just imagined it. Then another woman lifted her head, and another. Within seconds, nearly every prisoner was looking up. A field of eyes in the rain, silent, unbroken. The order had reversed itself. Submission turned to defiance in a single breath. Lieutenant Morse's voice cracked. "Put them down, now." But no one did. The guards stood frozen, rifles heavy in their hands. Harris could feel it. The line between duty and conscience tearing apart. He'd read about moments like this in war reports, the ones that never reached newspapers. Collective defiance by female POW. Recorded briefly in tribunal archives of 1947, then buried under bureaucratic dust. Tanaka's voice, soft but steady, carried across the yard. "We have already bowed enough. No threat, no anger, just finality." Rain pooled at her knees, and yet she stood taller than anyone there. Harris's mind screamed, "If I don't stop this, someone else will." His finger brushed the holster at his hip, not in threat, but instinct. Morse saw it differently. "Do it," he barked. "End this now." But Harris didn't move, neither did the prisoners. The yard had become something sacred: no language, no rank, just eyes meeting eyes under falling rain. We did not win, one of the women would later write in her diary, but we did not bend. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then Morse, face red, raised his pistol. The sound of the hammer cocking echoed like a warning from another world. Harris stepped between them. "Enough," he said. The gun trembled in Morse's hand, aimed at Harris's chest now instead of the prisoner's. The air was thick with rain and fear and something close to mercy. The pistol lowered, the rain softened. The yard stayed silent. No shots, no surrender, just the weight of what almost happened. 2 days later, the yard looked the same, but quieter. The mud had dried, the puddles gone, yet the silence clung like humidity. The defiance hadn't sparked a riot, just a report. Everything that mattered would soon be buried under forms, signatures, and silence. Inside the administration tent, the typewriter clicked without pause. Incident disciplinary. It read, "No fatalities. Order restored." Sergeant Harris sat across from Lieutenant Morse, who dictated the words as if erasing ghosts. Be sure to note, female prisoners exhibited noncompliant posture during morale exercise. Harris typed it exactly, his fingers trembling over the keys. The paper was thin, one mistake and it would tear. When Morse left, Harris stared at the carbon copy. He imagined future officers reading it. Just ink, no rain, no fear, no eyes meeting across mud. According to Army records, over 60% of Pacific Camp misconduct cases were marked non-actionable. Translation: forget it happened. The bureaucracy of amnesia worked faster than any weapon. Outside, Tanaka sat by the fence, whispering something to Ito. They were sewing again, repairs on the same torn uniforms they had worn during the stand. The thread was thin, black against khaki. Harris watched them from the doorway, a cigarette burning untouched between his fingers. They erased it from their files. One diary later read, "But not from our memory." He knew that was true. Every soldier there felt it the shift. The guards stopped shouting. The women stopped looking down. Even Morse walked differently, slower, like he'd aged years overnight. The war wasn't over, but something in that camp had ended. The illusion of control. As the sun fell, Harris signed the report and handed it to a courier. "File it under routine," he said. The envelope disappeared into the jeep, swallowed by dust. He walked back toward the barracks, passing the same bamboo yard, now lit by fireflies instead of floodlights. From the radio near the command post, static cracked, followed by a faint broadcast, Tokyo under bombing, the empire collapsing. Liberation was near, but Harris didn't feel victory. He felt the weight of unfinished apologies. That night, he found the diary again. He opened to the last page and added one line of his own. "Some orders never leave you." Then he closed it gently, like a prayer. August 1945. The jungle stilled as if holding its breath. The radio confirmed what no one dared believe. Japan had surrendered. The war was over, but in the bamboo camp outside Luzon, silence ruled instead of celebration. The guards stood awkwardly beside the gates, unsure if they were liberators or jailers anymore. American flags were hoisted above the watchtowers, the fabric heavy with rain. A truck arrived carrying supplies, canned peaches, cigarettes, powdered milk. The guards handed out tins to the women, expecting gratitude, relief, maybe tears. But the prisoners just stared. Some took the cans and placed them neatly on the ground, unopened. Others turned away. Tanaka held the tin in her hands, its metal cold, alien. Around her, the women whispered nothing. There were no cheers, no shouts of joy, just exhaustion. When the human body has survived too long in fear, freedom feels like a trick. According to release records, The average Japanese female POW weighed between 38 and 42 kilograms at liberation. Some were barely standing. Harris walked through the yard slowly, helmet off. His uniform hung loose on his frame. The camp had been handed over to medical staff, but he couldn't leave yet. He stopped near Tanaka. She didn't bow. Neither did he. "You can go," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long second, then turned toward the open gate. From the enemy's perspective, liberation felt like someone else's victory. Freedom tasted like ashes. One survivor would later write. "We walked out, but part of us stayed behind." The photographs taken that week, grainy, overexposed, showed women smiling faintly, but their eyes told another story. As the prisoners left, Harris reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, the diary. He hesitated, then slipped it into a supply crate marked repatriation documents. Maybe someday it would find its way home, or maybe it would vanish like the others. When the last group disappeared down the muddy road, Harris looked around the empty yard. The floodlights were off. The fences creaked in the wind. The only thing left on the ground was a crumpled photo, Ito's son, smiling through time and mud. Harris picked it up and kept walking, not toward headquarters, but into the trees beyond the camp, where the war couldn't follow. Tokyo, 1953. The war had been over for 8 years, yet its shadows still walked the city. In a quiet corner of the Yasukuni Museum, a small glass case sat unnoticed between tanks and medals. Inside, under soft yellow light, rested a single artifact, a weathered rice paper diary, its edges browned by tropical rain. The label read "Only author unknown, Luzon POW Camp, 1945. Visitors passed it without stopping. But one woman, a teacher with streaks of gray in her hair, paused. She read the faint handwriting, the careful English notes, the Japanese lines pressed so lightly they almost vanished. "Keep your head down," one page said. Another, "We learned to survive by pretending not to see." Her hand trembled as she turned the final page, where a line in a different hand was written, "Some orders never leave you." She exhaled slowly. Around her, the sounds of the city outside drifted in: streetcars, laughter, the hum of a rebuilt nation. Yet for a moment, it all faded beneath the weight of those words. Historians would later estimate that less than 5% of female POW testimonies from the Pacific were ever officially recorded. The rest lived in silence: burned diaries, lost letters, stories whispered to daughters who couldn't imagine what captivity felt like. War ended on paper, but memory doesn't sign treaties. Somewhere across the ocean, in a small town in Ohio, an old man kept a box beneath his bed. Inside, a rusted dog tag, a folded flag, and a photograph of a boy he'd never met. On the back, written in fading ink, were 3 words: "Return to Ito." The man never did. He died with the photo still there, tucked inside his diary, pages stained with Luzon mud. Back in Tokyo, the museum lights dimmed for closing. The teacher whispered the words softly, as if reciting a prayer, "Keep your head down," but she didn't bow. She looked straight ahead, eyes glistening under the glass reflection, seeing herself in every face that had once been ordered not to look. Because silence, she realized, doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it's the only voice history allows to survive. And in that hushed room, 70,000 dead voices finally exhaled, through a single diary that refused to disappear.